Hi, welcome to Creating with Alex Hodge, Coil Building a Planter. First, we're going to look at the tools that we will be using. I am using B-Mix Cone 5/6 clay, and you'll need a serrated rib ideally, or another scoring tool and a regular metal rib, as well as a sponge, wire tool, clean water, and a rubber rib if you have at hand. So first we're going to take some clay off the block. You'll want to start with about a pound of clay to start making our coils. Once you have your clay in your area set up, you want to make sure that you have a wide space on your table that is clear for rolling the coils. And then you're going to start by creating a coil shape just in your hand. This is going to make the process a bit easier to get started. And then you'll slowly but surely start to roll your coil. You want to use the palm of your hand to roll, not your fingers. You want to avoid putting your fingers on the coils too much, as this can cause ridges and unevenness. Your coil thickness should be somewhere between your thumb and your pinky, depending on how big your form is going to be. I am making a small to medium size planter, so I'm working with a thicker coil. If you want to make a small planter, you can use smaller coils. If you're making a very large planter, you will want to use larger coils. To roll your coil, you want to start with the palms of your hands in the center, as you see here, and then move your hands towards the outside of the coil. This is going to stretch your clay and elongate it while also thinning it out. It's also important to note that it is mostly the motion of rolling and not pressure that rolls the coils. Now, I would like a rounded base, so I'm going to use a bisque mold to start. You can also use a bowl in your home, but if it is plastic or ceramic or any material the clay will stick to, you need to cover it with plastic wrap. You could also make a flat bottom by just coiling a circle. So to start, you're going to score one edge of your coil all the way down and also put some water on there. If you use slip, you can use slip here. However, personally, I mostly just score and put a little bit of water on so that there is not actually a lot of slip in use. I do this because sometimes with too much slip, especially between coils, you can get cracking later because the slip shrinks more than the clay. Now you can see that I have wrapped the coil around itself with the scored edge going against the clay. And now I'm going to continue rolling to finish out my base. If you notice that your coil is not exactly round, you can gently press the elongated area and then continue to roll. Remembering that it is the motion and not pressure that is going to roll you out a very nice coil. For the integrity of coil building, we need to make sure that one side of the coils is blended very well. So I am choosing to smooth the outside of my base with my serrated rib, going over and over to score the entire surface and then go back and smooth it out. You could also just go straight to smooth, but because I know that this will be a large piece, I want the base to be very strong, which is why I chose to score over the entire surface. Again, reiterating that when you're rolling your coil, you want to work only with your palms, and you want to start from the center and go towards the outside. Coil building really is a matter of practice with rolling your coils to achieve something that is very nice and even. If this is frustrating for you in the beginning, just keep practicing. Now my coils are working towards building height and form. So when I go to add on my next coil, I am thinking about the direction the coil is put on and how that will affect the form. So you can see here as I go to lay it on, if I put the coil on the outside, my shape will go towards the outside. If I put the coil towards the inside, the shape will become concave. And if I want a straight form, then I will stack the coil directly on top, which is basically what I'm doing for this layer. To maintain the form, you must be very careful and attentive when you are blending. You can very easily push the shape towards the outside if you're blending from the inside, or push the shape towards the inside if you're blending from the outside. So as you can see here, I am supporting that shape with my non-dominant hand as I score and blend that coil to the base. After that base has been smoothed and built, I am adding coils now to achieve height. Now I will be using the coils as an aesthetic so that all the smoothing will occur on the inside, and I will be leaving the outside with coils exposed. This will require careful attention not to mess up the coils on the outside, and at the same time I am not trying to keep them totally perfect and just kind of going with the making flow. So for your design, I recommend making some coils just to play around with different shapes or ways that you can use the coils for decoration. So I've decided to do this sort of double swirl, and I will do an entire layer of these as sort of a band of decoration. Now you want to make sure that whatever your decoration you're using, you are doing proper scoring and attaching on all pieces. As you are working with the coils, you do want to make sure to go back and smooth the joining areas. You can use sort of the edge of your index finger, which is what I'm doing here. You can also use a small sponge, and later I will demonstrate the use of a paintbrush to further clean up those extra scoring marks and little smudges. So the cleanliness of your coils totally depends on your own working habits and aesthetic. If you are putting elements beside one another, you want to make sure that you score and attach any vertical conjoining areas in addition to the horizontal connections. With decoration coils like these, you want to be sure that you aggressively score and compress on one side, most likely the inside of those coils. So that is what you can see here. Being sure that all of these pieces are very well attached before moving on. If you do have some kind of band like this on your piece, you want to make sure that before wrapping your base up for the day, you want to close in those uneven edges with a top coil. This is really going to strengthen your piece and ensure that everything is drying more evenly on the in-between time. As you saw, I did go around the entire coil, pressing it down into that uneven layer. This is so that with those sort of bumps and crevices, that clay is more likely to fill in the gaps. This is not something I do on every coil, but when you are adding that regular coil onto a decoration band, you want to make sure that the two are very well adhered. So before wrapping this base up, I want to make sure that my top coil is very smooth, and I do also want to ensure that it will be damp enough to continue building. So I'm taking the sponge across that top coil to smooth as well as dampen. But you want to be sure not to drip water down the pot, especially into the center where it could sit and create a crack. So this is the first day's progress. After this, I will loosely cover my base overnight, and when I come back to it the next day, I am hoping that it will be stiff enough to continue building without causing any sagging. If the base is still wiggly soft, let it dry in open air for about an hour before you keep building. Now for the first coil on the next day, you want to be sure that you are aggressively scoring that top coil, and usually what I do is score as well as hydrate that top coil and then set it aside while I'm rolling coils. That way that top coil has a chance to soften and I can continue working while it softens. So I want to begin bringing the wall of my piece toward the inside to create a rounded shape. So if you look very closely, you can see that I scored the inside edge of my base, and I am placing that coil right on that inside edge to continue the curvature that I desire. Again, always supporting the outside wall when blending to maintain the form that I'm after. At some point in the middle of your building, you want to go ahead and make the drainage holes. You want to wait until that base is pretty stiff and set up, and then use a sharp metal tool or even a needle tool to cut out your hole or multiple holes, depending on what your plant needs. So you can cut those holes out and then smooth it over with a rib. And again, just reiterating the best coil rolling practices, starting with a chunky coil made in the hand and then rolling from the center with your palms towards the outside to elongate. Remembering not to use too much pressure, but to fully roll out the coil with the motion. And continuing to create that rounded form by placing the next coil again on the inside of the previous coil. You can periodically go over the coils with a damp sponge, not a dripping sponge, just damp, so make sure you squeeze it out. And by carefully and slowly going over the coils, you can re-emphasize their coil shape and clean up those junctions. Cleanup is best done when your piece is already fairly stiff. Not necessarily leather hard, but at least pretty close to that. So the best way to get rid of extra score marks and any slip that's squished out is by using a soft bristle brush with only water. As you can see, it begins to create slip on the surface, which you can then clean up with the sponge. As the coils towards the top of your piece need time to stiffen up before adding any more weight, it's a good idea to take a break from building periodically and go back and refine your surface. If you at any point choose to use a rib, I recommend using the rubber rib and being careful to avoid any coil designs that you do not want to smooth out. Here I am just smoothing the base to take care of any bumps in the surface. Now I've created a nice orb shape, and I want to think about how I'm going to finish off the top. By using two small pieces of coil, I can do what is called a profile view, where I test out different directions of adding those two coils. So I could close it off in more of an egg shape by placing those two coils on the inside, or I could place them directly on top for a straight lip, or towards the outside for more of a flare. That is what I'm choosing to do to finish off my piece. So as you can see, I will score towards that outside edge and place my coil on the outside edge to create the change in direction. Now, I do want to make a quick note about coils themselves. Some people who work with coil building will roll out or extrude a certain mass of coils and then keep them wrapped in plastic and work as they go. Personally, I prefer to roll the coils as I'm making to make sure that they stay fresh and don't get any dings as they're wrapped in plastic. But that is an option as you work to create your coils beforehand and keep them damp, or to create them as you go. Now I could be finished here, however I would like to push my form just a little bit further, and after exploring some different handle options, I've decided to encircle the entire rim with these sort of arches or loops. So that will be my final addition to the piece. If you do decide to add any components that stick out or off the piece, like you can see here, you want to be sure to dry your piece very slowly. If this was left out in open air, the sort of raised pieces will dry very quickly compared to the rest of the piece and will almost definitely have serious cracking issues. So for me personally, after making this piece, I allowed it to dry in plastic over the course of 2 whole weeks. That is maybe a bit extreme, but you first need to allow it to equalize with the base of the piece so that everything is the same level of dryness. And then you can slowly open your plastic more and more so that it begins to really dry. I am also choosing to go ahead and blend these additions into that top coil because they are a bit precarious in how they're attached. I want to make sure that they are very secure. So I am blending it on both sides, the inside and the outside. I will then go back later with a sponge to clean up the rib marks. After cleaning and refining the whole piece, I have decided to add some small carved elements. My recommendation, if you are going to do any carving on your piece, is that it needs to be at least leather hard. If you have rehydrated your piece through the sponging cleaning process, you want to make sure to let it set for at least an hour in open air so that the surface then re-dries and your carvings won't stick because of the dampness. And last but not least, you want to make sure that your plant is getting proper drainage. As we already put the holes in our planter, it's a good idea to make a small dish or plate so that when your plant does drain, there is a place for the water to go that isn't the floor. So as you can see, I've just rolled a simple long coil and I'm just going to roll it up into a spiral. This is the same way you would start a flat base if that is something you want to work with. And of course, you do want to check the size of your plate and make sure that even after the firing, your planter will fit inside nicely with room for the water to go. And as we did with our planter itself, you need to blend at least one side of your coils, and I'm choosing to blend the underside. And again, using that wet paintbrush to clean up those extra score marks and slip. I did also want to make a quick note that while this tutorial has focused on building a planter or a larger piece, these exact same principles of coil building can be applied to any shape or form. If you wanted to make a small piece like a cup, you would just want to make sure that your coils are smaller, closer to that pinky size that we discussed in the beginning, and vice versa. If you want to make a very large vase or planter, you want to use a thicker coil. Now the last coils that I'm going to make are to create a little rim on the plate so that the water, of course, doesn't just flow off. And again, I will be scoring and adding that coil onto the outside corner edge, not all the way on the outside, but not all the way right on top either. That way I create a little bit of an angle. And here we have the fruits of our labor. Thank you so much for creating with me, and I hope you have a happy time creating your own piece. You can find me online at Creations by Alex Hodge.